Support for this podcast and the following message come from Dignity Memorial. When your celebration of life is prepaid today, your family is protected tomorrow. Planning ahead is truly one of the best gifts you can give your family. For additional information, visit dignitymemorial.com.
Hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. This week, we are connecting the dots between podcast bros, class, and wife guys. I know. How are all of these things connected? Well, we're going to find out with NPR political correspondent Danielle Kurtzleben and race and identity correspondent Sandhya Dirks. Danielle, Sandhya, welcome back to It's Been a Minute.
Yay, I'm always happy to be here.
So happy.
Oh, so happy to have you both. And thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a busy week. But in one sentence, what was your biggest takeaway from the debate?
It was kind of boring. Like, if you're gonna tell so many half-truths or untruths, I would like at least to be entertained.
I was going to use the word boring, too. I mean, it was a boring debate in the most non-boring of times. The tone was so subdued, and nothing about American politics is subdued right now.
That's a really good point. Nothing about American politics is subdued right now.
Nope.
Well, my biggest takeaway was that J.D. Vance seems to have a future probably in the Republican Party, regardless of what happens here.
Yeah.
But the VP candidates debated over the border and abortion, but there was something they were debating over a little more subtly: white masculinity. White men went for Trump in 2020 by a 17-point margin. They might not be the most obviously swayable group if you treat them as a monolith, but like any demographic group, they're not all one. And they make up 30% of the U.S. population. That's not small. So enter our challengers: Democratic VP candidate and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, and Republican VP candidate and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. I think they have some commonalities here, as we discussed on this show last week. They're both Midwestern, they're both dads, and I'd argue that they are both playing on their demographic group to win votes. First, I would love to hear from you both. How would you describe each of their brands of white masculinity?
I mean, Tim Walz is playing like the Midwestern Menards ultimate dad, like coach dad, J.D. Vance, I've been thinking like intellectual Reddit dude. Like he is a guy who is very smart. He is very well educated. He went to Yale Law School. And not only that, but he is so not just willing to fight, he also so often seems spoiling for a fight. They chose someone who is very cogent and coherent in a lot of his speech, and who really kind of takes Trump's ideas and doesn't change them, but kind of puts them on an ideological or an intellectual skeleton, like tries to give them some sort of coherence. And no, this isn't just some guy doing a 90-minute speech and spouting off. This is a worldview, and I am going to articulate it to you.
So I'm going to go with like some real basic online labels right now, right? So like we've got on the Vance side of things, we've got podcast bro or the debate me bro, right? He literally almost got in a fight with the moderator because they fact checked him. And he was like,
the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's
on Waltz's side, it's wife guy. In this case, the wife is the presidential candidate, and he's that person who gives a lot of white men permission and gives them a way in, right, to support Kamala Harris in this way that is relatable.
So if J.D. Vance is kind of the well-read Redditor, and if Tim Walz is the wife guy coach, do you think they're vying for different kinds of white male voters?
They're vying for different voters in part by virtue of who the party's bases are. For example, on the Republican side, let's start there. The Republican side has been doing so well with non-college educated white voters. And so J.D. Vance, yes, he uses his Ohio upbringing cred, but also college-educated white men. That's who I would argue they're trying to reach. I had a Republican strategist call these guys to me once Peloton dads, which is a kind of perfect. Like, sort of a shorthand for college educated, probably upper middle class, often white men who live in the suburbs and, have a good income, all of that. Tim Walz, meanwhile, if we're talking about white men here, is flipping this. He's reaching for the non-college educated white guys. And that is kind of the language he's speaking with. I'm from rural Nebraska. There's a lot of non-college educated white guys and rural everywhere.
Each of them actually represent the stereotype of the opposite party, right? So, Walz seems like your classic Republican.
Right.
He's got a gun. He fixes cars. Everything about him, right? Signposts what we understand as potentially the typical GOP male whiteness father person. Whereas what's happening with Vance is eliteness, right? It's the Yale Law School veneer. And I think there is a little bit of that. But for me, tech broligarch, sort of, we rule the world, we know what's best. He's projecting a lot of that, right, in what he says. It does kind of, speak to having higher education, to having these tools, to having money. But you see them sort of doing this crossover appeal. They represent the stereotype of the other side. And so what they are is exactly aimed at pulling that, right, pulling that kind of normative way we think about voters and turning it on its head.
How do you see Vance and Walz confronting race head on or even stepping around it? And how did you see that play out last night?
Race is very, very, very present for both of these men, not just because of their own racial identities, right, as white men who represent the norm, the middle, what has been the face of those in power, but also because of the way in which they sort of talk. One of the reasons it was boring is it wasn't that there wasn't racism there, right? Like there was incredible racism happening in terms of blaming immigrants from everything from the housing crisis to school shootings.
The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number...
Of course, that is a totally misleading claim. The vast majority of guns used for mass shootings were obtained legally. Also, there's evidence that shows illegal guns are flowing in the opposite direction from the United States to Mexico. But yeah, one of the things that really struck me about watching the debate is that regularly the conversation kept returning back to immigration, even in topics where it didn't seem like immigration was in any way related, but it was very different to hear the same rhetoric, basically, that comes from Trump, but in a different package.
He did tone it down. We were going back to something we haven't seen in a while, which is dog whistle racism. Walz didn't kind of address it that much. He didn't push back against it, but he did point it out a couple of times, right? He kind of pointed out that, we're blaming this on, we're demonizing the other. And he talked about this sort of demonizing. That's a way of cutting to the heart of what racism is. But you can clearly see that race is at the center of what they're talking about. Because if you're blaming all of America's ills on an other who doesn't look like us, right, coming in and changing our way of life, what you're talking about is protecting and preserving a white way of life.
For a long time, masculinity has meant being head of the family. How have you seen Walz and Vance redefining and reinforcing men's roles in the family?
Danielle and I were kind of chatting about this online, that we were both paying attention to the big way in which being a father was so central to the performance. Both of them were being fathers, right? Very publicly for political reasons. Walz comes off or is trying to project this image of a loving, involved father who also talks a lot about his fatherhood journey. This is all part of his politic. On the other side, you have Vance, who also, talks about loving his kids, worrying about his kids, clearly is a family man. The other thing that I think is key is that Walz's whole narrative is about not only parenthood being a choice, it was a choice he needed help to be able to make happen. Whereas, from all of these sort of unearthed podcast clips, we very much hear pronatalism coming from Vance. And this is not new, this idea that women should have a lot of kids and that men should father a lot of children, and that there should be much less choice for the woman in becoming a mother. And there's also this idea that even, people who aren't parents should have less voting power. So parenthood is not only for Vance something that he performs. It's also something that people might have a moral obligation to do. And if they choose not to become parents, there's this idea that they are morally lacking and that maybe they should not have the same rights as parents. He's actually suggesting these things. So this is not just about how these men are performing their own roles as fathers, but how they're engaging with parenthood as an act of political discourse.
I think Sandhya really got at something important here, that in this era of post-Dobbs America, it's not just how are they talking about their kids and, how are we caring about kids that is coming into play here. It's what is our attitude about having kids? I think this is so correct of what Sandhya said, that we are not just talking about the decision whether to have or not have kids. J.D. Vance has said multiple things, whether it's denigrating childless cat ladies or saying that there's something wrong with teachers who don't have kids.
Right. Randy Weingarten, who was actually head of the teachers union.
Yes. These are all quotes that have been dug up. Like, devaluing not having children. I mean, I don't think it's any coincidence that these are the conversations we're having now when we're talking about fatherhood and parenthood and politics. Now the question is there a moral value on choosing to have kids or choosing not to? And I had not heard that nearly as often, maybe ever, in any presidential election.
Well, I know you both said that you felt like it was a little boring, but I think there was a lot to unpack. So I'm glad that I was able to unpack it with the two of you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
As a thank you to both of you, I'd like to teach you something by playing a game with you all. Can you stick around for a tiny bit longer?
Heck yeah.
Mm-hmm. We'll be right back with a little game I like to call, But Did You Know? Stick around.
This message comes from Cook Unity and their Chef-to-You service that delivers fresh meals right to your door every week. Cook Unity works with some of the best chefs in the country. Each meal is handcrafted by chefs with hundreds of dishes to choose from. Your food arrives fresh, never frozen. Experience chef-quality meals every week delivered right to your door. Go to cookunity.com/minute or enter code MINUTE before checkout for 50% off your first week.
This message comes from Charles Schwab. When it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices, like full-service wealth management and advice when you need it. You can also invest on your own and trade on Thinkorswim. Visit schwab.com to learn more. Support for this podcast and the following message come from the Southern Environmental Law Center and its podcast, Broken Ground. Picture the rural South, and country stores and fields of farmland may come to mind. But what about landfills, strip mines? All over the South, polluting industries are courting small towns, betting what they do there will be out of sight and out of mind. This season on Broken Ground, dig into what happens when small-town neighbors decide to fight for a better future. Now available wherever you listen to podcasts. This message comes from NPR sponsor Progressive Insurance, where drivers who switch could save hundreds on car insurance. Get your quote at progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
All right. We are going to play a little game I like to call, But Did You Know? Here's how it works. I'm going to share a story that's been making headlines this week, and as I give you some background on the story, I'll also ask you trivia related to it. But don't worry, it's all multiple choice, so the right answer is in there somewhere. The first one to blurt out the right answer gets a point. Person with the most points wins, and their prize is bragging rights. Are y'all ready?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right. Last week, it appears that singer-songwriter Lana Del Rey got married to a Louisiana airboat tour guide named Jeremy Dufresne. Many happy returns to the couple, but today we're going to get to know more about these lovebirds and the story of their wedding. To start, Jeremy Dufresne spends a lot of time zipping around alligators with people in his airboat. How many teeth can an alligator go through in its lifetime? Is it A, 500, B, 1,000, and C, 3,000?
I'm amazed that you went from Lana Del Rey to how many teeth an alligator has in like 2 seconds. That was the most amazing segue.
I'm going to say 1,000.
I will go for the most then.
All right. Well, Sandhya, good gut on that one because the answer is C, 3,000. There's only about 70 or 80 teeth in an alligator's mouth at a time, but they get worn down and replaced throughout their lifetime.
Are alligators just walking around dropping teeth left and right?
They're biting a lot. They're chomping on stuff.
They bite a lot of frogs.
That's crazy.
On to question 2. Lana is Miss Americana. Oh, that rhymes. And has invoked a lot of places in her music, from Louisiana to LA to Lincoln, Nebraska. But where is she from? A, Pasadena, California. B, Lake Placid, New York. Or C, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
It's not Ann Arbor, Michigan, because I am from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I know all people from Ann Arbor, Michigan who are famous.
I knew you were from Ann Arbor.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I'm from Farmington Hills. That's so exciting.
We have to have some Michigander bonding at some point.
We really do. Okay, so Sandhya says not C.
I think she's from Lake Placid.
Pasadena feels on the nose, but let's just go with Pasadena.
The answer is B, Lake Placid, New York.
Before I moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, I lived in Pasadena for a little while. So I was going by process of elimination that my life and Lana Del Rey's life have nothing in common.
I feel like Lake Placid is not really part of the Lana Del Rey aesthetic.
No.
But it is most notable for having the first continuously operating winter resort, the Lake Placid Club, which was founded by the inventor of the Dewey Decimal System, who allegedly was a terrible boss.
So many facts.
Brittany, the games on this show are like a Plinko chip. Where which
was the best game on Price is Right.
We started one place and I have no idea where we're going. It's just gonna land somewhere.
All right. Well, to recap the score, Danielle, you are at 0 points. Sandhya, you are at 2 points. All right. Question 3. There appears to be a little bit of drama surrounding the wedding. Dufresne's ex-fiancé, Kelly Welsh, has weighed in, saying she's, quote, in shock, but that, quote, he is deserving of this blessing. Is that shade or is that shade? Now, there's another story about this from the Daily Mail that we cannot verify. This is a rumor. But according to their source, what has Lana reportedly removed from Dufresne's house? Is it A, Kelly Welsh's plants, B, Welsh's crystals, or C, Welsh's art?
Crystals.
Art.
Hat trick over here.
What?
The answer is B, Welsh's crystals. Because reportedly they carry, quote, so much energy. Again, take that with a grain of salt.
That tracks.
As a crystal having person, that one also tracked for me. But okay, I have a question for y'all. Do you believe in crystals having energy?
No.
Sandhya, you're giving a very tight head shake, no. And Danielle, you paused. I really appreciate you all giving it thought.
So the thing is, a lot of my best friends are woo. And I love a lot of people who are woo. But I am not woo.
I have only so many woo points, and I have not spent them on crystals.
Yeah.
I have spent them on tarot cards.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I love those.
If I'm going to put the woo energy, it's definitely going to go to tarot, not crystals.
Porque no los dos, okay? All right. Well, that is it But Did You Know for this week. Congratulations to Sandhya on your win. And Danielle, Sandhya, thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having
me. Thank you. This is great.
That was NPR political correspondent Danielle Kurtzleben and race and identity correspondent Sandhya Dirks. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I get back, we're getting into Fat Bear Week and what bears mean to us. Stick around.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Vuori, a new perspective on performance apparel. Check out the latest Dream Knit collection by visiting vuori.com/NPR for 20% off your first purchase. Exclusions apply. Visit the website for full terms and conditions.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Dignity Memorial. When your celebration of life is prepaid today, your family is protected tomorrow. Planning ahead is truly one of the best gifts you can give your family. For additional information, visit dignitymemorial.com. Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Rosetta Stone, an expert in language learning for 30 years. Right now, NPR listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership to 25 different languages for 50% off. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR.
This episode contains some vulgar language and mentions of sex and sexuality. There's something very special happening this week. It's not on TV or in theaters, but in the animal kingdom. And one of my producers, Liam McBain, has been obsessed with it.
Brittany, I've waited patiently all year just to witness this. This week is my Super Bowl. It's Fat Bear Week. It's a yearly competition put on by the Katmai National Park in Alaska to celebrate the bears getting really, really fat ahead of hibernation. And every year I watch the live stream cams from home. It's literally just bears eating salmon and sitting in a bubbling river like it's their own personal jacuzzi. Like, it rules.
I will admit, when Liam first told me about this, I wasn't sold on it, but once I started checking out the live stream and seeing what the bears get up to, I kind of got into it. And the more we started talking about it, we realized bears are kind of everywhere in human culture. Think about it. We cuddle them as kids. They're in so many of our fairy tales, and we project so much more onto their furry faces. Are they our friends?
With a few good friends and a stick or two, we can build.
Our foes? Or, for the gay community, an icon of freedom?
I felt like that was the only community that understood me.
So this Fat Bear Week, I wanted to revisit our episode from 2023. Why are we as humans so obsessed with bears? And what does that obsession say about us? So gather ye round, a tale of Brittany, that's me, and the three bears. First, we begin with real Alaskan bears and how they actually live and hang out at Katmai National Park. And like I said, this was recorded last year. And I'll admit that this year, the contest got off to a rocky start. There was some inter-bear violence down by the river. Yikes. I mean, these are wild bears after all, and we'll get to that later. But let's rewind now and have Liam introduce us to someone who was on the grounds of the famed competition.
Yes, I talked to media ranger Naomi Bogue. She zoomed me literally in front of the most gorgeous river.
Two-time Fat Bear Week champion. He was just behind me in the lower river. It's too bad. You just missed him.
She said this year, there are a lot of big, good-looking bears.
I really shouldn't give you favorites because I don't want to influence the vote, but I can tell you 128 Grazer, who may be the best angler on the river. She's had 2 litters, and she is fierce. She looks great.
I feel like it's kind of sick to celebrate their fatness in such an uncomplicated way. And these big dudes have a lot of other people celebrating that too.
In 2018, the year before I got here, there were 55,000 votes for Fat Bear Week. Last year, there were over 1 million votes.
I watch these bears so much because they seem like they're just chilling, and I love their contemplative vibes. But I learned from Naomi that they're actually working really hard to survive.
It's for some bears more difficult to get fat. So we're rooting for them. And we're also rooting for the cubs because the cubs are so cute. But survival rate for cubs is not great. It can be 35% for cubs in their first year. So Fat Bear Week, it's rooting for the bears and celebrating the success of this ecosystem.
And while life can still be rough for bears, American bears are doing better now than they have been in years. Bear populations have increased thanks to conservation efforts, and they're expanding their range. They're popping up in places they haven't roamed in centuries, and we're noticing.
So as we're living more and more alongside one another, we don't all have to be bear super fans like Liam, but we all should be thinking more about our relationship to them. Up next, unpacking the dense symbolism of the bear. In early 2023, a video of a bear went viral. You might have seen it. It was a sun bear standing upright at the Hangzhou Zoo in eastern China. It wasn't doing anything weird, literally just standing there, but the video reached millions of people for one reason. Some people, for a little while myself, thought the bear was so human-like that it must have been a person in a bear costume. Now, it was a bear and not a person, but I saw this video and I can kind of see it. If that person in a costume had no butt and short little legs, maybe. But this phenomenon, looking at a bear and seeing humanness reflected back at us, is definitely not new. Here's Gloria Dickey, author of the book 8 Bears.
If we go back to like the Aristotle time, Pliny the Elder, they would look at bears and they would think, yes, like one of our closest relatives. And it's like even, thousands of years ago, we thought they could be human. And even today, we're like getting confused of how bears look so similar to us.
In part because of their anatomy.
Bears can walk on 2 legs or 2 feet. They're known as occasional bipeds. Not too many animals can do that. So it does give them kind of like that human stature for brief moments of time.
But it's also because of how they behave. Here's bear biologist Sarah Al-Maligi.
When you spend a lot of time watching bears just being bears, you start to see their different personalities and how one bear might react to something very differently from how another bear would. Bears are a statistical nightmare because even the same bear is not the same bear from year to year because it's learned things.
And while Sarah's focused on bear science for most of her career, she spent a lot of time thinking about what they mean to us. I sat down with Sarah to discuss just what about bears captures our imagination and how they're tied to our culture. Sarah, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
I'm really happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you and so excited to talk about your area of expertise today.
I love bears.
I mean, I hope you do because you've dedicated a lot of time and energy to them.
I have.
In thinking about that, there's a long history of humans identifying with bears. Many cultures, thought they were our closest animal relatives, the way that we might think about primates now. Is there something about bears that captures human imagination?
Oh, there definitely is. I mean, they are a very charismatic group of animals. When you watch bears, they have a lot of facial expressions and they're quite expressive in their eyes and eyebrows and ears. And it's not my place to talk about the indigenous relationship with bears, but there's like a very deep underlying respectful relationship between indigenous people and bears. And then when colonizers came to North America, bears were really seen as a symbol of the wilderness that needed to be tamed. And so that more aggressive, conflicting relationship with bears really started, when people were trying to establish homesteads. And it really came from this wanting to establish dominance over wilderness as we began to settle out west. Like, that's why there are no brown bears in California anymore, right? Like,
wow.
As we settled out west, we kind of killed them all.
Also, I think about how the big bears have also factored into even European cultures, like Roman and Viking cultures. It seems like where there were bears to be found, humans attached strong meaning to them, whether that was because they felt a kinship or a respect, or in the case of what you're describing, with colonization, they felt a fear. Yeah. They saw bears as a formidable opponent. I want to turn now to bears in pop culture. You have your cuddly bears, like many of us. I mean, I was sent home from the hospital when I was a baby with a teddy bear.
Of course you were.
Yeah, and I slept with it every night for the first, 8-9 years of my life. You think about Winnie the Pooh.
Bears love honey and I'm a Pooh Bear. Yum.
Paddington Bear.
And just one sandwich contains all the vitamins and minerals a bear needs for the whole day.
You've also got park ranger bears that have some kind of authority, like Yogi Bear.
Yogi Bear is smarter than the average bear.
Smokey the Bear.
Remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
And then you also got your man-killing bears.
Yeah.
In movies like Cocaine Bear and The Revenant. I feel like other animals only have kind of one quote-unquote personality or one archetype for their entire species. But you could see a bear as a killer and you could see a bear as a friend. How is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really insightful question. And I do think that some of it might stem from the fact that bear cubs are ridiculously cute. Oh my gosh, they are insane. They're so cute and fluffy and fuzzy. And they're just these little bumbling fluff balls, wandering through the forest. But then the flip side of that, of course, is that there are occasions where bears attack people and tragically kill people. And so there is this other side of their personality that is quite violent towards people if the right circumstances are at play. The reality is that bears are individual, and some bears are more aggressive than others, and some bears are, more chill. So, I mean, Cocaine Bear it's very hard to watch those movies when you're a bear biologist. Like, you're just like, oh no, I can't do this.
Is anthropomorphizing bears to a certain degree helpful or harmful to them and us in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah, that is a pretty continual debate, I think, in the bear world. When I go to bear conferences, we talk about that a lot. I think sometimes it can be helpful, but it can also be damaging because you might make assumptions that you don't know because you're not studying bears all the time.
Like assuming they're all friendly or something. Sure, right.
But then there's the other conversation of like, how do we generate public awareness and get the public interested in bears so that they want to conserve them? In North America, we have growing human populations, and all of those growing human populations are putting increasing pressures on all kinds of wildlife, bears included.
Right.
And so if we can anthropomorphize bears a little bit in our public communication so that people understand how important it is to give bears space and to respect them and to allow them access to important habitats, then bears and people win, right? But it is this very, it's very difficult. It's hard for some scientists to talk about bears in that way.
What about bears, or what we believe about bears? Do we as humans covet?
Well, I think that bears are still a symbol of untamed wilderness in a lot of people's minds. And we like to think that there are parts of the planet that haven't been touched by man. And it's not true, by the way. We have pretty much been everywhere now, but they're like the top of the food chain. So they just wander around and do what they want. I think we do covet that.
It's true. As human beings, there's lots of animals that we have dominion over, but bears are not quite there in that regard.
I mean, a lot of times we do, like 99.9% of the time. But every once in a while, we are reminded that we actually don't control bears.
Sarah, it's been such a joy talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this, Brittany. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to bear biologist Sarah Al-Maliki. Coming up, we just talked about how we see humanness in bears, but what about bearness in humans? As we just heard, bears hold a lot of symbolism in our culture. And while for centuries we looked at them and saw humanness, there's also a subculture of humans that emulates bearness. I'm talking about gay bears. For those who don't know what a gay bear is, well, it means different things to different people, but stereotypically, it means a cis gay man who's heavier and hairier than others.
I'm not going to kind of like sign my name in blood and be like, this is what I think a bear is, right? Because I think there are loads of variations, but I think the kind of huskiness, furriness, this heavy set, manly appearance, but which also is kind of cuddly at the same time.
That's Gareth Longstaff, senior lecturer at Newcastle University who researches queer theory and cultural heritage. He says there's been a shift away from this definition, though, to one that includes gay trans men and people with various gender expressions as well.
Trans men are using bear spaces and finding them as kind of affirming spaces. Increasingly, you will get lesbian bears, but bear culture has its genesis in very much white, cisgendered gay male culture.
He says it's not a perfectly inclusive culture, but at its best, it's playful, sexy, and often celebrates bigger bodies. Gareth says he sees a lot of potential in the bear. I sat down with him to talk more about how identifying with the bear can change how we see masculinities. Gareth, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Okay, so first question. What was the first time you went to a bear event, and what was your immediate reaction?
Oh, wow. 20 years ago, there was a very popular club called XXL.
I mean, it's a perfect name, yeah.
I can remember having like long conversations in XXL at the time because it used to kind of show on big screens things like the Golden Girls. So you would be like with all these really heavy set big guys, right? With loads of tattoos and loads of hair and shaven heads and tight t-shirts, dancing to like high energy dance music. And then there'd be like Golden Girls episodes on. And I love that very queer mix of things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that to me was kind of like, oh my God, I've come home. This is like everything I've always wanted. But that to me is one of the kind of like the paradoxes of kind of like virile and potent masculinity happening in that space. And then the opportunities within bear culture for a much more camp, playful, self-conscious way of kind of understanding and knowing one another.
So gay bears have been around for a while, both as an identity and a culture, and they started to really take off around 50 years ago. What need did it fill?
I think that bear culture, as an emergent culture, like from the 70s onward, is almost like this very smart, at times funny, subversive, transgressive way of actually taking an already existing straight male culture and kind of queering it. You get this constructed manliness, but done so in a kind of playful way. So I think you can take those things which arouse you socially, sexually, personally, and work with them and rework with them. And I think that's a very queer way of doing something. So the gay bear, in a way, subverts existing forms of masculinity, which forces you to kind of see masculinities and the plural, not just masculinity.
I definitely see that part of it, where there's this refashioning of traditional masculinity to make a new exploration of masculinity or creating a new tentacle or a new masculinity itself. There's something there about the body as well when I'm thinking about what need that bear culture might fulfill. Like I've heard from gay men in my life that there's a lot of gatekeeping in, let's say, like more mainstream non-bear gay spaces based on body type. So being, very specifically muscled or having a certain percentage of body fat or being thin. If that's not your body, then you can be excluded implicitly and in many cases explicitly.
I mean, gay male culture, it's as inclusionary as it's exclusionary in the same breath. Bear culture, I think, begins to kind of tear up the rule book slightly and say, well, actually, if your body type is not like a perfect, cover of a gay male magazine or a pop star, then there's space for you here. There are no rules here in terms of like having a big belly or, being 60 years of age as opposed to being 17 years of age. I find wonderfully exciting. But alongside of that as well, it also comes with its own parameters that you kind of need the hairy body, you need the mustache, you need the beard, you kind of need to be a bit bigger. So it's a bit of a catch-22 sometimes where you're kind of like, well, it's offering me up a space where I can be who I want. However, if my body type becomes too muscular or too slender and, I lose a bit of my belly or my hairiness on my chest goes, then does that exclude me more? So it's kind of like always a paradox, but I do think for all of its kind of challenges, I do think that the bear community allows anyone to question accepted norms.
We've talked about like how there's so many different shades to bear identity, but still, when it comes down to it, there is a very strong identification of gay bears with bears the animal. How does the bear the animal work as a symbol?
For me, there is a kind of like, with a bear, a sort of strength, potency, kind of virility, roughness, which is also undercut by its kind of cuddliness, its reliability, its comforting kind of quality in nature. And again, I was thinking about this, the bear in culture has so many variations. I think more specifically, though, in relation to kind of like the gay bear and the anthropomorphism, I think that it really feeds into that. And like, if you're rugged and cuddly, then you're a gay bear. That's the kind of thing, right? If I think of how we engage, and everybody does this differently, but if you think of the kind of sexual element to the bear, I've even seen guys, right? And it's a very big thing in like bear culture, If you go to a club night, often guys will end up with like their tops off. They'll be wearing harnesses, dancing together and like hitting each other's chests or like holding each other like that and like really like animalistically like kissing each other. But then there's a gentleness to it as well. Like when they move away, it might be like, oh, do you want a drink? Or, you know, that. So it's quite performative in some ways, that kind of idea of something which is intense and virile and aggressive and rugged. And then afterwards, you know, maybe after the kind of sex has taken place, kind of gentle and cuddly and respectful. It kind of does lean back into, you know, the bear as an animal.
I wonder, you described this sort of like camped up, refashioned, more playful masculinity. How does the symbol of the bear, or does the symbol of the bear help separate those masculinities?
Yeah, I think like that symbol somehow kind of grounds or connects bears together. The bear paw is used quite a lot in gay male culture. I talk about ecologist Timothy Treadwell.
This is the guy from the Grizzly Man film, right? That's who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you know the guy, right? So this is the guy that basically lives with grizzly bears, right? Very crudely speaking, right?
Yeah.
I can't remember the author specifically, but I think it's Colin Carman. He calls it grizzly love. This is kind of to do with a move away from our obsession with each other as humans and trying to understand through re-engaging with things like animals and nature who we are, you know? I think Carmen calls it like becoming animal, to actually like give your humanity up to a kind of animalistic form of becoming is an incredibly like liberating but also very difficult project to undertake, because it involves giving up everything that is normal to then go towards this very queer space of human becoming animal. And I think that there's something here with bear culture that kind of connects to that, this figure of the bear, which we can then kind of like assimilate as gay masculinity. It's kind of like an extreme or abstracted way of moving beyond our own humanness towards something which is kind of animal-like. So without the bear, I don't think bear culture would be the same culture that it is now.
Gareth, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you today. This has been so much fun, and I've learned so much.
Oh, thank you. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Brittany.
While Gareth sees opportunity for expansiveness, we need to take a moment to acknowledge that the bear community isn't all-inclusive just yet. Take party organizer Will McKinney-Rothfeld, who, at first, says finding bear culture connected him with the bigger men he was into.
It's like a kid in a candy store, truly. It's like, oh my God.
And while he felt welcome as a thick guy, as a black man, he didn't always feel included.
So I have been in and out of the bear community since around 2008, 2009. As I started to talk to more bears of color, it's like, this community is not as inclusive as it seems on the surface, even down to like the advertising and things like that. Up until recently, 9 times out of 10, majority of the men that would be on the flyers are always white.
But Will and his friends decided to do something about it. They created their own party for queer black and brown men of size in New York called Heft.
We created it as a means to give space for particularly big boys of color to dance to the music that we know and love, which is basically shake that ass music. Straight up Juvenile, City Girls, Megan Thee Stallion, all of that. So either the first or the second one was when we really knew that we were onto something special. Everyone just loving the music so much, throwing that ass back and just going crazy on the dance floor.
And while Heft aims to be a different kind of party for big guys, there's still one constant Will sees.
No matter where you go to a bear party, there's always going to be somebody that wants to take their shirt off. I mean, obviously, big guys get hot, they're dancing, they're sweaty, they just want to take their shirt off.
We project a lot onto bears, for better or for worse, but we project even more onto each other. And one of the things I keep coming back to as we've gone on this bear journey is that with all of the constraints of being a human, it's kind of freeing to look to the bear and remember that we're animals too. There's something elemental about ripping your shirt off on the dance floor, forgetting your self-consciousness and moving with the music, or sitting in a stream, knocking back salmon and vibing. While we know now they're not our closest relatives, bears are still a mirror that show us who we are and who we want to be. Thanks again to all the people you heard in this episode. Producer Liam McBain, Ranger Naomi Boak, author Gloria Dickey, bear biologist Sarah Almaligi, lecturer Gareth Longstaff, and party organizer Will McKinney-Raffelt. And for the bear curious, you can find the Fat Bear Week brackets at fatbearweek.org. Next Tuesday, I repeat, next Tuesday, in this podcast feed, I am headed back home to Detroit, Michigan for my final homecoming smackdown. This is the last stop in our cross-country debate series that determines what and who are the most influential things and people from American cities. How much do you know about Detroit? Tune in to the Detroit Smackdown next Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Barton Girdwood,
Alexis Williams,
Liam McBain,
Corey Antonio Rose.
This episode was edited by
Jessica Placzek,
Bilal Qureshi.
Engineering support came from
Andy Huther,
Hannah Glovna.
Our executive producer is
Jasmine Romero.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Online. Is your child asking questions on their homework you don't feel equipped to answer? IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid, no matter the age or personality. One subscription gets you everything. One site for all the kids in your home, pre-K to 12th grade. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And NPR listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Rosetta Stone, an expert in language learning for 30 years. Right now, NPR listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership to 25 different languages for 50% off. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR.